Hey guys, thank you so much for joining. We're here today with ClearTech Loop. We're on the move and in the know, and I've got a special guest. I've got Dave Linthicum. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Joe. How you doing, man? This is a great show. It's a great platform. I could not be happier to be here.
Aw, you're sweet. Thank you. Well, y'all, you probably know Dave already, but in case you don't, Dave is the founder and lead researcher at Linthicum Research. And Dave describes himself as an internationally known AI and cloud computing thought leader, very fair, enterprise technology innovator, educator, and five-time best-selling author. Holy cow. And he also says he's an over-the-hill mountain biker.
Yeah, very bad. Lots of injuries.
A lot of injuries, but still doing the mountain biking.
Still doing the mountain biking.
Because you love it, right?
It's a way to get out there and get some exercise and enjoy the outdoors. So I love that aspect of it. I just don't see me sitting in a chair in a campsite as of yet. I like riding through the woods and avoiding the bears.
Have you seen a bear?
Yeah, there are bears all over the place. I live in Virginia, so man, we're crazy nuts with bears. They're not aggressive bears. I always think they look like dogs, and I go, oh, someone's dog got off the leash. Oh, that's a bear. I guess it doesn't make sense because they're about the size of big dogs, and so in Virginia they're small. They're not the big brown bears out in the Northwest, but they're getting a bit brazen and coming into where the people are living now. Which is, I always keep an eye out for them. Not that I worry about them, but it is funny, you're seeing more and more bears these days when you're going off and mountain biking.
See, and who would have thought we'd be talking about bears on an AI security podcast? But, everything needs to be secured. Pretty soon you're going to get bear secure trash cans, right?
Yeah, they have those. Yeah, my idea of bear security is speed. So just keep going. They can run about 15 miles an hour. I have to put 20. So
they can go that fast?
Yeah, they're fast buggers.
Oh my heavens. Okay. All right. Well, we're going to shift from bears to generative AI and some security about that. So, yeah. Dave, my first question to you is how can cybersecurity professionals leverage generative AI to break out of sort of this traditional tools and tech mindset and drive more innovative thinking and execution in their security programs?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's obviously lots of dimensions to that, but the core value that I see would be the ability to simulate novel threats. And so, using AI, to create unique attack scenarios, figure out, different attack surfaces, and the ability to kind of, in essence, launch an AI agent. It could be an agent, it could be just a generative AI monolithic system that's able to act as a white hat hacker. In other words, figure out ways to attack your system. And so that's what the hackers are doing right now. The people are trying to breach the environment. So using AI as a weapon to figure out different ways and different angles of attack. And instead of going through it with a structured programming like they did a few years ago, they can now go through with an AI where it can hone in on particular vulnerabilities and find those vulnerabilities before you find them in your own system. And so, my advice is to my clients, well, use the same technology to figure out where your holes are. And so it's pretty easy for some, security testing experts and security engineers to put together, some sort of a generative AI framework to simulate attacks and attack surfaces on various systems. And obviously there's some security testing tools that are rising out there. They're all AI enabling their stuff. I suspect all of them are going to be systemic to those tools, and they'll be able to put up these scenarios. But that's a unique tool we haven't had, 2 or 3 years ago. Generative AI was very expensive, and now it's pretty much free. And we're able to define these LLMs as the ability to test our existing security defensive and find these vulnerabilities. And by the way, everybody asked to do that, they went off and found something. They found some sort of an API attack, the ability, vulnerabilities occurred, encryption wasn't secured, key management issues, things like that. You guys are going to remember, people are architecting these systems. They can't make everything in a perfect way. It's never going to be impervious. So your ability to exercise your systems to find these issues, figure out where the open holes are, things like that, is going to be a great tool. And people should always be using that. I mean, most of the cloud configurations that I've seen over the last 10 years, they all have misconfigurations and how their security, because they take the defaults and things like that. And even one, big security agency with the government, had an open, S3 object where you could pull it from any browser and had, top secret information in it, classified information. So all these vulnerabilities are there. We just need to get good at finding them. Number one, you need to get good at setting up your security initially. Going to read the stuff you do and basically follow, your advice and how do you set up security in a way that's going to reduce the amount of vulnerabilities, reduce the amount of risks. It's never going to be eliminating that. But also the ability to go behind you and test it. So you're doing stress testing, you're doing penetration testing, all these sorts of things versus just running through some sort of a structured methodology and how you're going to look for vulnerabilities in the system, but the ability to create unique scenarios that we may not even think of before. So get a generative AI system, get an LLM that's fairly good trained, give it some local training with how your configuration is occurring, and then ask it to go create 100 scenarios that would test penetration of the system. Out of those 100 scenarios, you run them against your existing security infrastructure. You may come up with 2 that point out to a vulnerability. That's a win. That's one that you're able to find versus your adversaries. And I think that the security folks are getting that stuff in there now. Everybody's AI washed their stuff. They go, oh yeah, we're AI enabled. Everything's AI. And by the way, we do agentic too. But they don't really have those capabilities in the system yet. And so the people who are using it, normally the security people I work with, are doing so through their own ad hoc frameworks and utilization of the system, which you can do with any LLM out there. They're all free. They're all kind of plus or minus 10% the same functionality. You do have to do some localized training to them to understand your configuration. But the reality is they're going to understand more about your security configuration than any of your testers will ever will, and they'll be able to put up unique scenarios that'll test your security. And I think that's an awesome thing to do with generative AI. So turn it against yourself, but for good reasons.
I love that. That's great. Hack the hackers. And in case you all are not aware of it, the Cloud Security Alliance has a really great paper out that maps AI security against NIST. And so there's holes, right? Because we're all growing and learning. So to Dave's point, what's older may not cover all the controls that you need for AI. It's because AI doesn't follow the rules. That's part of the problem, right? It really is truly part of the problem. So Dave, next question, how can organizations embed security and privacy controls into their AI model development without sort of slowing down the innovation?
Well, the first thing I would tell and advise people who are doing this, and I do teach an AI architecture class, and we talk about these things all the time, would be to shift left with the automation. So you're able to integrate security and privacy checks, early in the AI machine learning pipeline. And your ability to put it early in the stage would be something that I constantly recommend. Everybody has a tendency to, when they're done with the system, suddenly they throw it out and they go, by the way, just check it for security. Here's a checklist, security, checklist governance, checklist operation control. I'm a big advocate, and I have been for a long time since I've been doing this architecture stuff, to put that up in the front. In other words, I'm not going to be able to build a system that's going to have the best security unless I build it into all of the core processes. I build it into my AI systems, things like that, because you got to have new vulnerabilities with AI, model poisoning, all that kind of stuff that's popping up. But you think about it early in the process, you're not getting to this point where I've already built it and we realize, oh, darn, we screwed up 10 things we have to go back and fix. And you have to loop back. And I've done this a few times in my career. It's not fun. And then redo existing stuff because of security vulnerabilities that are built in. And so, I tell everybody, that setting up, dev pipelines for generative AI systems and agentic AI systems, security can't be an afterthought. And by the way, security can't be the last of the 3 steps. I say normally people do it in the last 20% of the project. It needs to be put in the first 20% of the project. It needs to go into the design phase. And I understand it's something else we have to deal with as, AI architects and AI application creators and designers, things like that, to figure out how security is going to be systemically built in this stuff. But it's part of building an exceptional system. And virtually, 80-90% of the systems out there haven't thought about it that way. And they think of it as an afterthought. You can kind of tell the security is kind of jerry-rigged in the end. and
Yeah.
basically living up to the minimum viable vulnerability that they're able to have. And we don't have to do that. I understand we're going to make the process a bit more difficult and a bit more complex because we're adding additional steps early in the phase, but we won't have to deal with it later in the phases of development before we do the deployments. And you're going to find yourself much better off with higher quality software. And by the way, if you build your system systemically around a security model, as well as governance and operations, those are a part of it as well, and also SecOps, you're going to have a much more viable product that's going to exist, have a life cycle that's going to be probably twice as long. Because many of these things are shut down or deprecated or sunsetted because of low security issues or security issues they have in the system and too much time to engineering the stuff. If you build the thing, setting it up predefined to accept a number of their security models, encryption patterns, compliance issues, things like that. When you get it out and you start operating it, it's going to have a life cycle that's going to be 10 to 20 years, not 5 to 10 years. And good engineering is good engineering. So I urge people, even if it costs a little bit more money, to shift left with your AI security procedures.
Yeah. And that, what you're saying hits on so much of some of the studies that have come out that talk about the fact that enterprises are launching AI products, but they're not securing them. I thought I saw one study come out a couple of weeks ago where only 6% of the AI projects that had been launched had security baked into them. Like crazy low, right?
I'm seeing that as well, and it's bad practices. And you would figure, we're 2025, we should be much better at doing security, and we're able to do things in a faster way. I think it's a kind of a lack of understanding out there. I don't think the security professionals are being taught about this early on, and they're not necessarily being taught in how security gets into the application development lifecycle and the AI development lifecycle and how it's going to be impacted. In many cases, we have the silos of the devs, sitting in DevOps frameworks, things like that. And they do security and they do some initial testing as well, but they don't understand its systemic use. And that's because they're not taught to. And so when I, talked to people about this, and they said, "Well, why aren't you doing that?" Go, "We've never been instructed to do it. I have all these DevOps certifications, and Google DevOps and AWS DevOps, and all these sorts of things." Well, the reason you haven't gone into it because they're not going to talk to you about something that's outside of their implementation power. And the reality is that this is going to be groups of software that's going to be all the various vendors out there and how you make everything work and play well together. So they're not having the discussion with them because it's not related directly to the software cloud service that they're selling. So therefore, we have all of these devs out there, and DevOps engineers, people have very powerful positions in these companies, are not working with the security teams. The security teams are not insisting on working with the devs. And we have this big chasm that's occurring where the people doing development, aren't necessarily the security professionals that they need to be, and not building systemically into the system in terms of the capabilities that they need to happen. And the security people know it, by the way, but I would talk to them and they say, we have no influence with that group. And so, well, this is one of the things where you got to kind of knock their heads together and say, you guys got to be on the same page, because security people, you're not going to be very effective if the devs are opening up vulnerabilities into the system because they're not systemically building security into the environment. They're putting it as an afterthought. And by the way, devs, you're not doing a good job anymore. You're creating stuff is going to be worthless in about 2 years because security is so bad. We're going to have to sunset it, throw it out, and replace it with something else. So what do you want to do? You want to build something for the long run that's going to bring lots of value back to the business, guaranteed to do so with the best security posture you can have. And with that, it means building into the system. Or, option two. And option two sucks. So
that's the takeout from this conversation. Option two sucks. All right, last question. So, we've got security that's built in, and then we've got organizational governance. At least that's how the way I think about AI sometimes. I think about it as kind of two separate areas. So I'm the CISO, or you're the CISO. How would a CISO be thinking about AI adoption, in those two swim lanes, emerging threats, and then from an organizational governance perspective?
Yeah, the main priority that comes to mind would be proactive intelligence or proactive use of AI frameworks, generative AI frameworks, specifically LLMs. And basically, it's enhancing threat intelligence and the ability to adapt defenses around, different responses out there and what you're going to do. So, how are you going to automate incident response? How you're going to look at the new threats and how you're going to adapt to the new threats and do so in a very short period of time. It's not this big run in a big circle until someone figures out what went wrong. And really, you do that with using intelligence as a weapon and the generative AI systems. So you're proactively looking at what the vulnerabilities are. You're proactively looking at the incident response. You're creating incident response procedures. You're creating workbooks in terms of what you're going to do if some sort of a breach attempt occurs, or God help us, some breach occurs. So that's the best use of the technology. You can do other things like governance frameworks and put security governance around that, and some of the LLMs will tell you a good way to do that. And then also collaboration, with cross functions teams, partnerships with security, things like that. You have to deal with in the silos within the business. But I think nothing is going to be more valuable than the proactive intelligence. So you're enhancing threat intelligence. You're, adapting to different defensiveness in a rapid way. And the big thing was, and this is many things that these CISOs don't have, is have some sort of automated incident response that occurs.
Yeah.
In other words, they don't know what's going on. They pull out a piece of paper. Yeah, someone wrote this 5 years ago. Here, tell us what to do. We got a ransomware attack. But your ability to get into a tool, and by the way, the security people are moving in this direction. Security tools and technologies, they haven't moved there yet, though. So in other words, we're basically custom building much of them stuff ourselves. And you guys are yelling it through the screen right now. If you got something, show me. The reality is that we have the LLMs. They're programmed with most of the best practices in how security responses should take place. And we're either pre-creating those scenarios or we're creating some sort of a pre-trained model. In other words, a model that is an LLM, ChatGPT, 4.1 or whatever, where it is trained with everything that's in your current system configuration, all your parameters, all your touch points, all your surfaces, all that kind of stuff, and knows everything about your existing as-is state of your system. Also knows everything about the best practices in security and the ability to use it in a proactive way. In other words, if something is going to happen, figure out the path to do the most correct incident response that's going to minimize the damage. And I think that's where the technology can come in handy, because guess what? Most CISOs that I see do not have incident response procedures. They don't have things like that. They figure it out as they go, and they do so in a reactive way. And I understand why they're doing it, but they don't have current documentations, workbooks, playbooks, and what to go through. So when something like this happens, they kind of run around in a circle with their hair on fire until someone figures out some sort of approach to making it happen. And while they're doing that, the penetration in the system is typically getting worse. They don't have the ability to assess the damage. They don't have the ability to isolate the compromised areas of the system, because no one has thought in terms of how that's going to be done. And by the way, you can set up systems now that are able to diagnose, some sort of an incident, and then give you, based on your configuration, step by step, what you need to do. So in these sorts of situations where everybody is running around the hair on fire, you get the list: step 1, what you shut down; step 2, what you check; 3, where you find the artifacts; step 4, all these sorts of things that are going to be very difficult for us to figure out in high pressure situations. We need to pre-do this stuff before these things occur. And I guarantee you, we're going to see some huge breaches into this year in 2026. We always do. And by the way, most of them aren't reported. They just they're not doing press releases around it, where the incident response around this stuff has been abysmal. And if you ask the CISOs, more of them are very honest and good people. I say, how come the incident response was a little subpar based on some of the best practices? They would tell you they never thought this would happen. And this is where you're going to have an opportunity to figure out the different scenarios and how this stuff would happen. And by the way, you're not going to have to pay, consultants to come in, $1 million project to do the incident response procedures for you, because the Gen AI system should be able to do a yeoman's job in getting your configuration. I'd rather you do that and actually you form your incident response procedures than wait for some consulting firm to come do it for you. And they're going to do stuff in a static way. You're not going to have the ability to go back to the model and ask them questions. They're going to give you documents, PowerPoint presentations typically, and they're going to leave the area. You're not going to use it until these incidents occur. I'm talking about not only creating proactive incident responses in terms of the path you need to take to deal with these certain instances, but also have interactive systems where you can figure out stepwise based on how the configurations change, and also have the AI system have dynamic understanding in terms of the configuration, how its current instance is, not as you defined it a couple of years ago, and the ability to basically define your best path out of it. And I think it's too bad that the CISOs out there aren't using this technology, but this is what it's for. And so your ability to automate things in a way that's going to be able to do stuff very inexpensively, and your ability to create pre-create procedures are going to be proactive in nature, and the ability to query a model when you need it. And it's basically free. There's no excuse not to be doing this.
That's a really good explanation. And I am, a glass half full girl. And I feel like we're moving in that direction. I'm starting to see some things happen that folks are putting into place exactly what you're talking about. So I'm hopeful over the course of the next 12 months, we're just going to get savvier about some of the incident response things that are happening, right? And better at it. So as always, I could talk to you for another half an hour. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day, Dave. And thank you everyone for joining.